So Karen Walkowski is a difference maker, and my phone is not cooperating. Okay. She is a retired healthcare executive with over 40 years of experience in the healthcare industry. She's worked with several different organizations, working in new program development and implementation and strategic and business planning. She's been very involved in her community, including 8 years as a Minnetonka School District board member and 2 years as the board chair. And we are actually neighbors. She walks in front of my house every day. So it was fun making that connection with her. She has a passion for international travel and is for supporting several global organizations, especially in East Africa. She joined Rotary in 2012 because of Rotary's commitment to international projects. She has been working with the Rotary Initiative to End Human Trafficking in Minnesota since 2017. And in May of 2020, she worked with others to launch a new cause-based global Rotary Club focusing on ending human trafficking, and she served as the charter president of that club from 2020 to 2022. So we are happy to have this expert here giving this talk to our club today. So please help me welcome Karen.
So as Sarah said, I got involved in the topic around ending human trafficking in 2017 when, as a president of my local Rotary Club, I went to a president's meeting and we were at a brainstorming session with our district governor at the time around what could we as presidents and what should we focus on that year. And that year, as you may recall, the Super Bowl was coming into town in 2018. And foolish me, I raised my hand around a brainstorming session because the headlines were starting to talk about sex trafficking and how that sex trafficking kind of followed big events, including the Super Bowl. And I raised my hand and said, well, why does Rotary do something around sex trafficking? And he said, great idea. I think you should lead that, Karen. And you know, again, raising your hand is a dangerous thing with Rotary. So I was tasked with pulling together kind of a group of folks to talk about how we could focus in on looking at sex trafficking as Rotarians around the Super Bowl. Fast forward 7 years later, I'm still involved with it. So, but having said that, so we worked with around pulling together 3 districts that cover Minnesota, and looking at a multi-year initiative around ending human trafficking in Minnesota, with the leadership and with the vision and the support of the district governors from those 3 districts. And then looking at the initiative 3 years later, I went back to the district leadership and said, look, we've made great progress. We have the commitment of folks in Minnesota, but you know, we need something bigger and more sustainable, and looking at Rotary as you know, Rotary's commitment to sustainability, and it can't be landing on my shoulders. So what should we do? Now, the good news, you know, pandemic was just starting, and the one good thing about the pandemic was everyone went to Zoom. And so the leadership at that time said, well, why don't we start a cause-based club? And since everybody's on Zoom, we don't have to work within the confines of our local geographic area of our district. So let's make it a global club. So I said, great idea. So we started a global club, and we now, we're actually in our 5th year after chartering. So we now have a Rotary Club that's a cause-based club, working on focusing on ending human trafficking globally. And it has been remarkable, and looking at talking about really expanding from sex trafficking to really truly understanding human trafficking from a global perspective, understanding from a global perspective what human trafficking means, and it means something different depending on the lens in which you are working. I have a colleague who has a nonprofit, runs a nonprofit based out of Hong Kong, listening to the call centers, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But understanding the just the tragedy about people who are being trafficked and pulled into call centers that, we think they're annoying phone calls about, hi, this is Mike, and I'm calling from Microsoft, and that's not Mike. But who that person is, that person who's, is being forced to I'm telling you that his name is Mike, is frightening. In Southeast Asia, understanding what's happening in the Lake Volta in Ghana, and the little boys who are being forced to fish when they're 5 years old, things like that. That's bigger than what we hear about the sex trafficking in massage parlors in Chanhassen. So we know it happens globally, but it's also happening in Chanhassen. But we also know that Rotary is uniquely positioned to be able to help end it. And so one of the things that I love this quote from Desmond Tutu, that when we look at ending human trafficking, when we think about ending human trafficking, and when I talk to people, they immediately go to kind of, let's rescue the victims, and let's look at restoring them and helping to focus on the survivors. But if we're truly going to end it in the same way that we look at polio and eradicating polio, I'm sure Rotary clubs, when they first talked about eradicating polio, thought about building iron lungs and building wings in hospitals to help the victims. But to be truly effective, we have to go upstream. And in the same way, that's why I really love this quote. So think about that as we're talking about this today. Okay, so first thing we always have to talk about is definitions. I know there's lots of words, and there's going to be lots of words on this presentation, and I apologize. I'm not going to offend you by reading everything, so please follow along. But definitions are really important. So the first thing is, this is a very long definition. It's taken from the International Labor Organization, which is one of the premier sources for many of the statistics that you will see today. It is quoted by, is the kind of the premier source for much of the statistics. The important thing that I want you to all take away is human slavery and human trafficking, you will hear interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Most of the world refers to this as human slavery. Because of the connotations and the connotation of slavery in the United States tends to veer away from the definition of slavery, uses the term human trafficking. That means the same thing. So they are really used interchangeably. I'm going to give you kind of a global picture, and then we'll get down to Minnesota, kind of as a filter. Right now, statistics are there's about 50 million people enslaved in the world today. When I did this presentation in 2017, pulling from the International Labor Organization's statistics, they update their statistics about every five to 7 years. This number was about 40 million. So numbers have actually increased in the last 7 years, unfortunately. Now within that, you're going to see also, when you start looking at sources, of this, about 27 million are within forced labor. Embedded in that are also child marriages. So some sources would exclude child marriages from their statistics. They are included in this number because many of the sources do include child marriages as a form of slavery. Which, by the way, which we'll see in the United States, child marriages actually exist in the United States as forced marriages. This is, as I said, this is an increase over 2017. It's huge, big business. Human slavery or human trafficking is the second largest illegal industry in the world, second only to the drug industry. The difference is, in drug industry, product is able to be used once. It's not a non-repeatable product, if you will. The product of human slavery is a repeatable product. So, and you can see the breakdown. What I don't have up here is also the value of the per person value of a victim has also increased. In 2017, the value of a person enslaved was about $1,900 per person. It's now up to about $2,400 per person. here's your rate of exploitation. So basically, think of this as, the numbers, but think of it in your head as there's a new person enslaved or a new victim, one every 4 seconds, somewhere around the world. Here's kind of where the victims are. Basically, sex trade. Now, the interesting thing is when we think about sex trade, again, in the United States, we think of sex, we talk about sex trafficking as sort of where our head goes to, but globally, sex trafficking is only about 25% of human trafficking. It accounts for about 75% of the profits, but it's only about 25% of the number of people that are actually enslaved. The rest of it is actually in the service industry. And I did the growing segments that I talked about in 2017 when I first started doing research in this area. Call center scamming and organ harvesting were not even on the radar. Those two areas have been growing ever since in 2017, and really during the pandemic have really started. Again, I talked about my colleague who is now focusing on the call centers. He is a gentleman who actually spent 35 years in his primary career, actually working with the state departments. He was worked in USAID, worked in, really, that was his primary focus. So he worked with the US government for most of his career. Now runs a nonprofit out of Hong Kong. Brilliant man. If you follow him, his name is Matthew Friedman. Brilliant man, has written, he publishes a blog on LinkedIn and on Facebook. So if you follow him, he's just prolific and is an amazing gentleman. I was talking to him about a month ago, and he said, I have never been as exhausted as I am now in trying to work with these call centers scams. He said, it's just, scary, remarkable. And here's just kind of to that point, this was some of the information that he said, just the growth of the call center scams. In the US alone, again, $12.3 billion that were lost in 2023 due to that just in the US. So how are we doing in the world? And somebody was talking about, we're making progress, right? Actually, we're not. With all of this, only about less than 1% of our criminals are actually convicted. And we're going to see this number. Think of this number and remember this number when we get to the United States, and in Minnesota, because this is where the challenge is. The International Labor Organization actually has some data that they're able to pull in order to estimate the numbers that I've just given you. When we get to the United States and Minnesota, I can only find information about actual convictions. So instead, and I'm not really good at data analytics, so if I was smarter, I could do the same extrapolation. I'm not. So I'm not even going to attempt to do that, because one of the things I'm very particular about is being able to source data. So I'm not going to give you Karen's extrapolation of things. But keep that in mind when we look at Minnesota's data is based on actual conviction rates, actual numbers. And if it really represents only less than 1%, think about that in your head. So globally, only 8% of criminals are convicted, and only about 0.2% of people that we think that are actually victims are actually helped. Okay, let's flip to the US. Again, we have about 1.1 million new victims or victims each year. Again, about half of them are children and about 90% are female. Probably growing, it's probably closer to 70% now, because we're seeing an increasing number of boys. We're also seeing we're seeing probably the foreign nationals are leveling off a bit because of some of the issues with illegal immigrants are leveling off as well. And again, child marriages do exist in the United States. About 300,000 children are legal, and these are legal marriages, and again, having an adult get a legal passport for a child through whatever agencies. They bring them over and then they marry them. Basically, they probably through some sort of private adoption, bring them over as an adopted parent, and then they actually marry them. What's happening in Minnesota? Again, this is dated information because I was not able to pull updated information. So this is about 2019 information. So I'm guessing it's probably underestimated rather than overestimated. Again, Minnesota, which was really a kind of an epiphany for me when I was learning about this, was Minnesota is still on the top 10 list for the FBI as a watch list. And it was just shocking to me because we're Minnesota nice. We're, you know, a wonderful place to live and great community. So I was really surprised about this. But when I started looking at this, it was interesting for me to think that, and understand it was, you know, why is Minnesota such an attractive place? Well, we are a major port. We are a border state. You know, not the major border. We have several interstates. We have a Mall of America, which is a big attraction, but we also have, you know, other malls. And we have a growing modeling industry, and modeling is also an interesting, you know, is a place for traffickers. And we have, you know, as I said, trafficking is increasingly involving boys. I will say a note from the interstate. One of the things that is from the good news perspective is when I first started being involved with this, trucking and the truckers was another place, and interstates with truckers was a bad thing. You know, they were really identified as one of the issues and the problems. Over the last 6 or 7 years, the truckers have really understood their role in enabling trafficking, and they have stepped up. And I think there's a huge now national group called Truckers Against Trafficking. They have really stepped up, become real advocates, and as a peer group have really become advocates and as a peer group really stopped a lot of the trafficking and so I've been really impressed as an observer watching what's going on with them. All right, I'm going to go really fast for this because I know I could spend all day on this. Who are the victims of trafficking? Here's sort of the average age and the life expectancy of victims. There's not an intervention. And what are the risk factors? Lots of risk factors. I was talking to somebody earlier and said, you know, we talk about polio and the challenges we've had with polio where there's one problem, one intervention, and one outcome, and we still, you know, we're still struggling to eradicate polio. Look at all the different risk factors of having to deal with trying to resolve or eradicate human trafficking. The issue is really looking at at least in the United States, it's really vulnerable youth, and you know, however we define that. And here are some signs for looking for signs for young people who are vulnerable. And again, this is unique to the United States. If we want to talk about this as a global issue, we'd have to rewrite this presentation, depending on the context. Who are the buyers? Again, this is also unique to the United States, but they're basically white males who, or not white, but men. And who are the traffickers? The number one trafficker is our family members. Now, family members could be an uncle, step brother, step somebody or another, so it's an extended family, but it's a family member, and then other people within the network. Okay, the good news. Why do I think Rotary can and should be has a role in ending human trafficking? Again, as I said before, Rotary is the largest global service organization. We touch every, you know, we have 34,000 clubs, we are in 196 countries, and we have 1.4 million business leaders and community leaders. So how do we do it? Here are 4 quick ways, and I have more information if you're interested as a club or as individuals. First, we raise awareness. Inviting me today, thank you for doing that. I'm honored to do that, but just raising awareness. Having been doing this for 7 years almost, I am still amazed, not in a good way, but amazed at the lack of awareness of just the issue of this, and that people don't think that it's happening in their community. It is happening in their community. It's happening around the world. I have a Rotary colleague who lives in Thailand, and he and I joke. I said, you know, Jerry, everybody that I talk to in my community thinks that it doesn't happen in my community. It's happening over there in Southeast Asia and in Thailand. And he laughed, and he said, that's okay, Karen, because everybody who I talk to in Thailand doesn't think it happens here. They think it happens in the United States. So we're trying to hit each other. So raising awareness. Talk about it with your family. Talk about it with the folks that you have. You know, it's uncomfortable, but just at least raising awareness. Educating our children and our youth. There's lots of great programs out there. Our club, actually, one of the things that we do is we have decided that part of our job is to endorse programs, of education programs. So we have a fairly rigorous assessment tool, and we have a committee that goes through, and when programs are presented to us, we go through and look at them and then endorse them, which is really saying, we've done some research to see which ones would be worthwhile for other Rotary clubs to fund, to assess, to look at embedding in their communities. So these are just a few of them. Reducing risk factors, trying to get kids to understand, or youth to understand, that there are alternatives. Great programs. We are blessed in our community to have some great programs. Support those programs to give kids a sense of hope, to understand that they are valued, and then steer them into those programs before they feel like that's the only option, is to choose a lifestyle or be forced into a lifestyle. And then the flip side, which I don't think we talk enough about, but part of the education programs is stopping the demand. This is a simple economic equation, supply and demand. So, yes, we spend a lot of time talking about the supply side, but we also have to stop, the demand side. Talk to young boys and men to say, this is not a rite of passage. If you're going out on a fishing trip with your dad, part of that weekend is not going off to the local brothel, is not going off to whatever. This could be your sister, this could be your cousin, this could be your best friend that you've known since you were 3. This is not okay. And start having those conversations. And really becoming an ambassador of change. When I first started talking about this and said, how do we stop this? And the woman who had been in this for a long time, she said, in some ways, this is going to be, we have to change the next generation. And I thought, right, I can't do this for 40 years, and I'm going to be doing it for 40 years. So, also, if you're really interested in this, we have stolen an idea from, there's a couple of ways. You can become a committee chair, start an activity, or become active in your own club. You can also become an associate member of our club, which is really becoming not staying within your own club, but also joining our club too as an associate member if you'd like. So that's my unashamed plug for our club. And you can also join our clubs. We're a virtual club, so you can come in 7 o'clock on Thursday mornings. So with that, any questions? Yes.
Karen will probably remember, as I do, being on the city council when they, in Bloomington, when they, every year or so often, every so often they would bring people in front of you and shame them for selling liquor to underage people, and they would either suspend or revoke or whatever their liquor licenses.
And cigarettes too. Or
tobacco products, whatever, which is also a serious, abuse of children, but probably not as serious as the ones you're speaking of. So it seems to me that both by licensing and by contract, you might be able to encourage organizations to suppress demand that way, to the stick instead of the carrot that you're talking about. Licensing, if people were employing child labor, you could suspend or revoke their business licenses. By contract, when a convention, such as you were working on, came to town, the Super Bowl, you could revoke their tickets. Just have that in the standards for getting the tickets. For a political convention, you can tell them they can't be a delegate, have an alternate take your place. For, you could do these various things by contract, and, that would be in your, if you want to purchase this admission, or for that matter, if it's a performer, you could have in their contract that they would forfeit their net proceeds to an organization, such as the ones opposing, human trafficking in the sex area or whatever. But anyway, it seems to me there might be some public policy aspects as well as just educating people better.
Great idea. There's a couple things, couple of challenges with that. Number one, with sex trafficking, you need a victim. So it's an individual crime. So part of the challenge is you need a victim who will be charged. They're challenged to come forward. So secondly is, even if you get that victim to come forward and to follow through on the charges, the judges will many times not even follow through on either the charges or the fine. And so, and there's a challenge when you actually follow through on some for the buyer. Now, because the challenge is you've got three players. You've got the victim, you've got the buyer, and you have the trafficker. And so between the buyer and the victim, that's kind of a challenge in itself. If you start looking at the trafficker, that's even bigger now, and that becomes almost a federal issue. The new Supreme Court judge, I'm really excited. The Supreme Court, I can't even say her last name, Laura Pazza something another. I'm really excited because she actually came and spoke at our summit. She's taken sex trafficking. Has taken on sex trafficking cases and has been very successful. But that was she was a federal prosecutor, and she was incredibly successful, including one that we had a sting in like 2018, that included, it was an 11-state sting where one of the houses was out on Minnetonka Bay. And she got them, and it was one of those things where the traffickers moved the girls, they were all girls, between all of the 11 states so that they did not know where they were. And they had a coordinated sting, raided all of the 11 houses at the same time, so the traffickers couldn't move them all. So they were like in Atlanta and Minneapolis or Tonka Bay and all over, and she was part of that. So that was really cool. But between a buyer, just the individual buyer, to your point, the victims very rarely, it's challenged to even get them to say, that's the guy who, I exchanged money with. So even the buyers, I've talked to detectives, and they get burned out because part of it is even if they pull the girls off the street, it takes 7 or 8 times interventions. And the girls were, they're hungry, they're homeless. That's where going upstream is even more important, because they'll say, it's at least a bed, even if I am beaten, or even if I'm, it's better than an alternative, and they'll go back. And that was even one of the things with the Super Bowl. It's like giving them mittens and giving them gloves and giving them food. It's like they end up going back. And I talked to one detective, and he said, "I've been rescuing this girl. This will be the 7th time that I've done this. So getting her to court, 3 months later, is a huge challenge." Did you have something else? Yes.
Yeah, I know a lot of the times the problem is with people from other countries is they don't want to go back to the other country. This is talking about the victims, and the biggest concern they have is getting deported, even worse than getting out of the business or whatever they're doing. But my question is, since we have a problem, Thailand has a problem, many countries have problems, what are the countries that do not have problems?
There isn't one.
So, but certainly there's got to be a difference between the high incidence countries and the low incident countries.
That's a great question, and I honestly don't know the answer.
Because obviously we're not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And maybe Thailand isn't doing the right thing, but somebody's got to be doing better.
Yeah, and that is actually a really interesting question, and that is a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, just a guess would be the Scandinavian countries, but that may not be accurate.
Yeah, I know that one of them, and I'm not even going to tell you which one because I'll get it wrong, and that would be bad, legalized it. And there was a study about legalization of it, and what they thought was going to be the right answer ended up, I don't know, longitudinal study was not the right answer. So that was, so interesting. Any other questions? Yes.
I may have missed it, but one of my questions is, how are boys also falling victim to human trafficking?
So in the United States, they are a much smaller cohort, but they are a growing cohort. And it's primarily boys are more as you grow in the homosexual boys are the primary or non-binary boys. So it is, and I'm dating myself because this is old data. In probably 4 or 5 years ago, it was about 5 to 10% of the cohort. It is a growing percentage now, but it is mostly women and girls in the United States. Now, if you're looking at labor trafficking in the rest of the world, it is much more boys. So because of the labor cohort.
Yes.
One last question. Just a statement. The Sean Diddy Combs thing last week, that was a triumph. He ended up in jail and his lawyer thought he could get him out. Sean Diddy Combs?
Yep.
Okay, that was...
But, it's like one thing, and it's when we know that we've got 1 million kids.
Yeah, and those were grown women, of course, that came forth.
Thank you all. I can be here for other questions if you have them, but thank you so much.